Hey guys, welcome to another installment of The Great Divorce. Today we'll be focusing on chapters 3 through 5, talking a little bit about the garden imagery, and then introducing the two characters that we see in chapter 4 and then in chapter 5. So first, let's hop right into chapter 3. So we have a garden image, right? That's what heaven is depicted as in this allegory, and one can assume that he picked a garden because that alludes to the biblical story of the Garden of Eden, where God's creation was then zoomed in from chapter 1 to chapter 2 of Genesis into this narrative between Adam and Eve in the garden. So it's almost this perfected creation. This contrasts possibly the hell state, where it's a dusty town of isolation and gray. So we can possibly see this juxtaposition of complacency, of grayness, of lack of color, with the amazing array of colors in nature. And how does that relate to this paradigm? He could be using these colors to show almost desolation versus beauty. Shadow versus truth is what we'll actually be talking about next. So we have these characters. We have the men who are seen to be actual physical men in the town, but rather when they go to the heavenly state, C.S. Lewis describes them as being almost spirit-like or ghosts. We're going to use the term ghosts mainly because then he contrasts the people they meet as spirits. So these ghosts, they're seen as quite literally transparent unless you see them in the shadow, and then they look like opaque shadows. So why would he have them be almost completely see-through? Well, maybe that's to show this idea of what we believe to be solid and true and real is actually just a shadow of the beauty and actuality and truth of creation and God's intended creation. This does perhaps show some allusion or some merit to Plato, who is a Greek philosopher, his allegory of the cave, where we have three characters looking at shadows of what was actually in the real world, but rather when one escapes and sees the truth and sees that everything they had viewed up to this point had been shadows and goes back to tell his friends of the shadows, they kill him because they're not truly ready to accept that what they believe to be true was actually true at all. So maybe C.S. Lewis is playing off of that idea of that we in this world and those in hell only see mere shadows of the beauty and truth that is accessible and able to be seen in heaven. And this idea of will they accept it is definitely a theme both in the allegory of the cave and in the the Great Divorce. So we then see at the end of chapter 3 spirits coming from the woods. They're seen as very glowy, wearing robes. They say, C.S. Lewis claims they're ageless, but they have this youthful face, but also this wisdom behind them. And so what he's trying to show is that these are the counterparts to the shadows, whereas the shadows were pained by how beautiful and how perfect this world was. The spirits were at home in this perfected place. And we notice at the very end of the chapter, the spirits seem to be going specifically to one type of ghost or one person, and that's where the conversations take place. So the question at the end of the chapter is, what do they have to say? And that's what we'll be going with in chapter 4. Chapter 4 we're going to call the angry man. We had used this term in previous chapters to describe him when he was in the line. Very big man, talking about his rights. And now we're going to show why is he this way? Why is he the angry man? And really, is he all that evil? And what does C.S. Lewis have to say about this archetype? So first, a few characteristics that I picked up on in this character of the angry man is that he's a decent, hardworking man. He isn't all that bad. He hasn't committed any brutal crimes. He wasn't this evil person. He just worked for everything he had, and what he worked for, he achieved. So he got what he deserved in all aspects of his human life. He worked hard and achieved it. He didn't ask for anything more that he deserved, and he was fine with that. The only thing that he was truly angry about was the murder of one of his workers, who was a young boy. Who murdered him? Great question. The spirit that is in heaven. And that's where we have the question of this chapter, and actually why this man is angry at all. So now let's talk about the spirit, and then we'll get into some good issues addressed. So the spirit, as we said, had murdered the young guy that worked for the angry man and caused this man to be angry. What we also know is that he lived a life of hatred. So this person, spirit in heaven, lived a life of hatred, murdered a young man, and constantly, as he put it, murdered the angry man, his boss, every day of his life. But what's interesting, and why he became a spirit in this heavenly realm as opposed to in the hellish realm of the city, is that at the very end of his life, he accepted Christ and asked for forgiveness right before he died. Why would C.S. Lewis have this murderous, hate-filled man at the very end of his life come to the Christian faith and then end up in heaven? But this man who worked very, very hard and was fair ended up in the hell realm. And that's the major issues that we'll be talking about in this chapter. So first, the first issue we're going to talk about is being a good person gets you into heaven. C.S. Lewis is combating that. He's showing a guy who, although was not very evil, and he was justly angry, meaning he was angry over a young boy being murdered. That's okay in terms of societal standard. You're allowed to be angry about that. And he's saying, so although he had just anger and worked for everything he did, that doesn't get you where you need to be. That doesn't make you good enough into heaven. And so what he's saying is you can never be good enough for heaven. But even the people that were evil, if understanding the gift of Christ, do end up in this heavenly state. What we see here is the constant repetition of the word, I want my rights. I just want my rights. That's what the angry man says constantly. He's saying, I worked hard, I just want what I deserve. And what I deserve is to be in a place that's all right because I worked hard and I was a good guy. I wasn't great, but I wasn't horrible. I was just a solid, good man. He also reminds Len that he was fair and never took anything that wasn't his. What he's showing is that he lived in moderation. Again, according to societal standards, that was completely okay, and that was good. Yet Len, the spirit, was not. So what is C.S. Lewis trying to say with that? It basically comes down to this idea of mercy and grace. Grace being getting what you don't deserve, and mercy being not getting what you do deserve. So what he's showing in this thought experiment is that Christianity is not about being good enough, and it's not about working hard, and it's not about getting you what you deserve, but rather recognizing your faults, accepting it, and asking for forgiveness and accepting the gift that's offered. So Len had murdered someone but sought forgiveness near the end of his life. The angry man could not accept this forgiveness and therefore lived a life of hatred and eventually always being in a place where he felt like he got what he didn't deserve. Or got what he didn't deserve and didn't get what he did deserve. And then Len wants the angry man to follow him and he will serve him. What we see here is Len goes, okay, come with me to the mountain. And that's going to be a common theme. All the spirits saying, come to the mountain, which is an allusion to Dante's Divine Comedy with a mountain being purgatory and eventually leading to the heavenly realm. But he's saying, come to the mountain and I will serve you. You say This is not what you deserve. Well, come with me, and I promise you, I will serve you if that's what it takes. Yet the angry man is so angry about what had happened in the past, and he couldn't let that go, that he goes, no, I can't do it. If it's a place that accepts you, I don't want to be a part of it, and then goes to the bus. And that's the end of the angry man. So what can we learn from that? What we can learn is that C.S. Lewis is trying to say no one will be good enough for heaven, but it's only through forgiveness and grace and mercy. What he's also saying is we have to think about the people that we don't believe deserve to be in heaven may as well be there. And would you be willing to accept a place that accepts those people? And that's the end of chapter 4. So let's go into chapter 5. We're going to call this the apostate. What the apostate literally means is a person that rejects doctrine or religion. So let's talk a little bit about him. We had mentioned him a little bit, not by the name of apostate, but mentioned him a little bit on the bus about being a very intellectual man. So he's an intellectual man. He has a history with the Christian faith. We find out he was a theologian. What we also find out is he became powerful within a church denomination and eventually questioned some core beliefs of the faith, including the crucifixion. So what we also have is the Spirit. So the Spirit, his name is Dick. What we need to know is he's a little bit younger than the apostate. We don't know what their relationship is. It talks about them having some intellectual discourse. So we can either assume that the apostate was a teacher of Dick, or maybe they were colleagues at the same university. We don't know exactly, but we know they have some sort of relationship. But the important thing to note about Dick, just like Len, is at the end of his life, he recognized all of the flaws that he had in his intellectual inquiries and came to accept Christ. And therefore his goal is to tell the apostate, hey, you were wrong. It's okay to accept you were wrong. If you accept it now and come with me to the mountain, you can be with me in this heavenly realm. So let's see what major issues are addressed in this chapter. First, we see that intellectual inquiry with no interest in truth is not okay. That's what C.S. Lewis is trying to say. He's like, sure, you can have all these intellectual discussions, all this discourse, but if you're just questioning to question, what is the point? You're getting nowhere. You're like a dog that chases his tail and gets nothing done. You're arguing for the sake of discussion, but no truth can come from it. This book was published in 1945. What we can possibly assume or put into question is that C.S. Lewis is combating this idea of the postmodern philosophical worldview that came to rise in these next few years, but started in the 1940s. And what they advocate for is extreme skepticism, and that nothing is truly fact when it comes to philosophical ideas. You can understand some things to be true, but realistically, truth is purely up to your own experience. So we see that mainly with the apostate. He goes, sure, we can have intellectual discussion, but can we really know anything as true? And what I've been questioning lately is, well, how do you really know God is true? Because what is truth in general, as well as questioning what heaven is and what hell is. And we get into this comedic interaction where Dick goes, do you not know where he is? And he's like, well, I mean, do we ever know where we were? And Dick goes, you were in hell. And he's like, well, you don't have to be so aggressive and you don't have to be so crude and obscene about it. And he's like, no, that's what we call it because we're saying it for what it is. It's not being crude, it's being factual. What we also see is C.S. Lewis combating the idea of liberal theology left unchecked can lead to heresy. At this point with this new philosophical movement, C.S. Lewis is questioning, okay, sure, it's great to question, but if you're just questioning for the sake of questioning and not for truth, this leads to a very slippery slope and a misunderstanding of Scripture, which can eventually leading you to miss the point. We see a part where he goes, well, God is true. Dick says God is true. But then the apostate goes, well, I prefer supreme value being a less inadequate term. What he's saying is he's not even crediting God himself. He's saying, okay, maybe it's something out there. And again, that's something we see with either Gnosticism or this New Age movement of philosophy. What he also says is, well, have you ever noticed it interesting that Christ died so young, and so maybe the crucifixion is tragic not because it was the sacrifice of this divine figure, but rather his theology must have certainly changed if he had lived much older. I mean, 33, that's so young. And that is the true tragedy of Christianity. And Dick is like, are you insane? No, he is God. Therefore, saying that is completely inaccurate. And then, of course, the apostate gets angry at that. And lastly, what we see here is the apostate is then asked to come to the mountain by Dick, and he goes, well, is it a place where I'll be needed? Because I want to find a place where I am needed and I have to be there and can contribute. And he goes, no, it's not. You're not needed at all. In actual truth, no one is needed. They're wanted, but if you think you're going to contribute anything, you're not going to contribute, because that's not what it's about. It's not about contributing anything. It's about being in the presence of truth. And he goes, well, I'm sure there's going to be some intellectual inquiry. He's like, why would there be inquiry if we already know the truth? There is no point of inquiry, but rather understanding the beauty of truth. And so what we see here is C.S. Lewis showing how philosophical views are great, but if left to this worldview of needing to be needed and trying to be arrogant in the way of intellectual prowess and dismiss anything of objective fact, you're missing the point. And of course, this might personally hit home to C.S. Lewis, being that he was an academic. So we have to keep into mind a lot of this chapter 5 is probably things that he's interacted with, and therefore brings this almost relational aspect. So what we need to know here is the major takeaway of these two chapters, and most likely going to be the takeaway for most of these chapters when we have the ghosts interacting with the spirits. And it's that even when presented with the option for truth and beauty, those who seek themselves never truly desire heaven. And if heaven is different than their own perceived notions of what it is, will they accept it? Again, we see the angry man walk away, because if that man is in heaven, I don't want to be there. We have the apostate leave and go back to hell, because then he can go into his inquiries and doesn't have to understand truth, and at least he can feel needed down in hell, as opposed to be in the presence of truth. It's ironic because the apostate sings a hymn about the city of God without realizing he's ever in heaven in the first place. So with that, we're going to end there and continue next week. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you then.